All right, Beyond Good and Evil, aphorism 17. A prelude to the philosophy of the future. Remember, we're supposed to be wakeful. Everybody that's coming in with their opinions on Nietzsche, and it's like, you read what someone says about it, and that just doesn't always work, and especially in this case, because there's historical controversies of propaganda. People say Hitler was heavily influenced by Nietzsche. Really, because Nietzsche said a lot of negative things about the ugly and stupid German. Yeah. And he praised the Jewish people. That sounds like Hitler was heavily influenced by that, huh? Okay, aphorism 17. With regard to the superstition of logicians, I shall never tire of emphasizing a small terse fact, which these superstitious minds hate to concede, namely, that a thought comes when it wishes, and not when I wish, so that it's a falsification of the facts of the case to say that the subject I is the condition of the predicate think. It thinks. But that this it is precisely the famous old ego is, to put it mildly, only a superstition, an assertion, assuredly not a quote-unquote immediate certainty. After all, one has even gone too far with this it thinks. Even the it contains an interpretation of the process and does not belong to the process itself. One infers here, according to the grammatical habit, quote, thinking is an activity. Every activity requires an agent. Consequently, end quote. It was pretty much according to the same schema that the older atomists sought, beside the operating power, that lump of matter in which it resides and out of which it operates, the atom. More rigorous minds, however, learned at last to get along without this earth residuum, and perhaps someday we shall accustom ourselves, including the logicians, to get along without the little quote-unquote it, which is all that is left of the honest little old ego. See, it doesn't matter your view of Nietzsche overall for that to be thought-provoking, right? And those of you that believe in determinism can get something from this argument, even though he wasn't your kind of determinist. He didn't think there was that will was free or unfree, and he did believe there's strong and weak will, and he seemed to believe people could make choices, and yet he was also possibly some sort of a determinist, like his eternal recurrence was at least a thought experiment based on a type of determinism. Aphorism 18. It is certainly not the least charm of a theory that it is refutable. It is precisely thereby that it attracts subtler minds. It seems that the 100 times refuted theory of quote-unquote free will owes its persistence to this charm alone. Again and again, someone comes along who feels he is strong enough to refute it. All right, 19. I'll finish with 19. Philosophers are accustomed to speak of the will as if it were the best known thing in the world. Indeed, Schopenhauer has given us to understand that the will alone is really known to us, absolutely and completely known, without subtraction or addition. But again and again, it seems to me that in this case too, Schopenhauer not only did what philosophers are in the habit of doing, he adopted a popular prejudice and exaggerated it. See, this is why I agree. People go, oh, most philosophy is bullshit stuff. Yeah, most philosophers are taking popular prejudices and exaggerating it. It can still be useful to read because you get a microscopic view on a popular prejudice, potentially. It's not too distorted by the magnification. It's also why you can't say this about all philosophers, because philosophers are the ones that are catching the other philosophers on shit like that. Willing seems to me to be above all something complicated, something that is a unit only as a word, and it is precisely in this one word that the popular prejudice lurks, which has defeated the always inadequate caution of philosophers. So let us for once be more cautious. Let us be, quote-unquote, unphilosophical. Let us say that in all willing there is, first, a plurality of sensations, namely, the sensation of the state of away from which, and the sensation of the state towards which, the sensation of this from and towards themselves, and then also the accompanying muscular sensation, which even without our putting into motion arms and legs, begins its action by force of habit as soon as we will anything. Therefore, just as sensations, and indeed many kinds of sensations, are to be recognized as ingredients of the will, so secondly should thinking also. In every act of the will there is a ruling thought. let us not imagine it possible to sever this thought from the willing, as if any will would then remain over. Third, the will is not only a complex sensation and thinking, but it is above all an affect, and specifically the affect of the command. That which is termed freedom of the will is essentially the affect of superiority in relation to him who must obey. I am free, he must obey. This consciousness is inherent in every will, and equally so the straining of the attention, the straight look that fixes itself exclusively on one aim, the unconditional evaluation that this and nothing else is necessary now, the inward certainty that obedience will be rendered, meaning the obedience of the body to the will, which is not really certain, but there's a sensation of it being certain, and whatever else belongs to the position of the commander. A man who wills commands something within himself that renders obedience, or that he believes renders obedience. But now let us notice what is strangest about the will, this manifold thing for which the people have only one word. Inasmuch as in the given circumstances we are at the same time the commanding and the obeying parties, and as the obeying party we know the sensation of constraint, impulsion, pressure, resistance, and motion, which usually begin immediately after the act of will, inasmuch as on the other hand we are accustomed to disregard this duality and to deceive ourselves about it by means of the synthetic concept I. A whole series of erroneous conclusions and consequently of false evaluations of the will itself has become attached to the act of willing, to such a degree that he who wills believes sincerely that willing suffices for action. Since in the great majority of cases there has been exercise of will only when the affect of the command, that is obedience, that is the action, was to be expected, the appearance has translated itself into the feeling as if there was a necessity of effect. In short, he who wills believes with a fair amount of certainty that will and action are somehow one. He ascribes the success, the carrying out of the willing, to the will itself, and thereby enjoys an increase in the sensation of power which accompanies all success. Freedom of the will, that is the expression for the complex state of delight of the person exercising volition, who commands at the same time, identifies himself with the executor of the order, who as such enjoys also the triumph over obstacles, but thinks within himself that it was really his will itself that overcame them. In this way, the person exercising volition adds the feeling of delight for his successful executive instruments, the useful underwills or undersouls. Indeed, our body is but a social structure composed of many souls, to his feeling of delight as commander. Le fait c'est moi, I am the effect. What happens here is what happens in every well-constructed and happy commonwealth, namely, the governing class identifies itself with the successes of the commonwealth. In all willing, it is absolutely a question of commanding and obeying, on the basis, as already said, of a social structure composed of many souls. Hence, a philosopher should claim the right to include willing as such within the sphere of morals, morals being understood as the doctrine of the relation of supremacy under which phenomena of life comes to be. Right, so this community of soul things is consistently throughout Nietzsche. I like that way of looking at it. The differences between me and Nietzsche, for example, I would never praise Napoleon, are because my society of souls are different. So see, that difference between me and Nietzsche doesn't change the fact that, oh yeah, the system, we could both look at this system. Why are we so different if we both think we're a community of souls? Well, I don't know, why are two nations so different? So, there you have it.